Welcome. This is a recorded lecture for the Milpa Medica course uh, on remembering, restoring, and repairing through art. And this week, I will talk about disobedience to the linear and ecologies of the far right. This lecture will be in 6 parts, broken down. We look at the fundamental violence of supremacy culture and elitism that is inherent in the growth model that currently dictates our economy and discourse. So this talk will deal with histories of heavy violence and also current affairs. And I do want to caution everyone to pause the lecture when you feel overwhelmed or when you feel triggered or when you feel numb. Please take care of yourself and do make the best of your learning environment being one that you can shape. Maybe grab a cup of tea or coffee before we get started. This is quite a ride. It's 6 parts. So we'll start with the ontology of the linear. So ontology, kind of the nature of being of the linearity as a project. Then we'll look at social Darwinism and ecology, looking at the consequences of when applying cultures of supremacy, always wanting better and more, to biology and the history of racism through categorization. In the third part, we'll look at blood and soil with a particular interaction of cars. This bit is about white rage and about sharing public space with Black, Brown, and Indigenous people, and how the car is instrumentalized as a weapon of who belongs and who is considered as an alien or an outsider. Up next, we'll expand our vocabulary a little bit with the discussion on techno racism and fossil fascism. We'll end with a piece about denial, both about extreme right-wing think tanks and also how right-wing thinking kind of leaks into progressive movement. And I'll end with a piece about racism is an environmental issue. And I hope by then that will be obvious. So starting with questioning linearity and linear growth, this means starting with the story of capitalism. It also includes a critical lens on the so-called green growth or the sustainability bubble. And we'll see how the first line of defense of this entitlement is state, corporations, police. But when all that fails, we'll see chauvinist factions of the extreme right taking up more and more space. So let's get going. Okay. So linearity, the way that translates to land in the first place is something we see under colonialism, is the idea of growth of this linear line, increasing more and more influence, more and more extraction over other territories. And a particular idea of maximizing growth, and this also being something that has straightforward production lines. And here, I mean, we see 2 projects. One, the colonial project of settler colonization of Turtle Island, in particular the US, and we see it expanding, and to this day, the US is kind of held up as entrepreneurial success, whereas the other, not westward expansion, but the project of eastward expansion proposed by Germany, was now goes down in history as the worst dictatorship and the worst genocide. And it really was horrific, not to take away from that, but they were inspired by the westward expansion, which equally entailed genocide and war and land theft with hundreds of different peoples and tribes. So this whole idea of Lebensraum kind of denotes of a growth that centers some agents, people, some humans, as the one that are meant to grow, and others that are meant to decline. And so you need an ideology of growth, what is growth, and what do you measure, and who gets to grow. So measuring growth, there seems to be a bit of dogmatic thinking in the growth culture that locates the credits for growth in individuals. So those individuals are often the dominant individuals posed as leaders or managers, and the web of life, the place where all of this extraction is taking place, is kind of obscured or even forgotten. So the web of life is really the way that Indigenous people talk about what is considered nature in Western culture, but the web of life is one that knows no beginning or ending, whereas nature, there is this idea of visiting, going to a place, going to the forest. You're going to Amsterdam Bos, you're in nature. You're in the tram, and you're not in nature. Whereas the web of life is everywhere, and it looks at how everything is also interrelated. So when you violate a place and you violate people and their labor, all of that is what shrinks. The obscured or the erased place that we need to remember when we talk about linear growth is all that shrinkage, everything that has shrunk. And it's maybe obvious to us, but I want to make it explicit in this lecture, because as we'll be talking about the violence of the extreme right, I find it very important to first look at the systemic violence of the extreme center and the history of colonialism that brought us here. So sticking with capitalism for a bit more, growth is then linked to the concept of production, who is productive and who is not. So in this example, I'd like to highlight that within the capitalist model, when you're doing forest agriculture in a way that is in harmony with the surroundings, you're feeding your family, that is not considered production. It will not be featured as such. Will be not measured as success. It will not be a linear line that is increasing. However, when you're clear cutting and you're selling that timber on a market, that is considered production. So here the magic box or the magic word is really the market. If you're not doing it for the market, if you're not selling on the market, if you're not selling yourself on the market, then it's not considered production. So this is also this line of thought continues in our conceptualization of many things, including our universe and how we get to learn about the idea of an expanding universe, that we are in this universe that is in an outward motion. I don't know if anybody of you in school ever saw this picture. It is the very idea that space, the universe, is depicted as a plastic balloon with coins on it, and a white man blowing up the balloon, making the universe more and more expensive. That is quite an interesting image to analyze. But for the purpose of this lecture, I just want to point out how erasure takes place even on this level. And we don't get to ask the question of not just who's that dude, but where are the lungs? The understanding that the first law of energy is the conservation of energy. So energy transforms, but it doesn't diminish or exceed or grow. So the idea of convergence, digesting, transformation is kind of eliminated. So we don't see the transaction of one energy becoming another energy. And this is so pervasive in our culture that sometimes we don't even notice how the commons are erased. We see it in our organizing when we campaign against oil, and we say no blood for oil, and we see that that oil comes from a place, and that place is being bled, is being extracted from with violence. But in mainstream culture, the cost of extraction, the cost of shrinking the commons is something that is erased. So remembering is this very political act that goes against the current of linear extraction, of linear growth. A quick note about also degrowth. So degrowth, I'm interested in the movement, and I think there's really beautiful things to it. But in basic, it says we have a problem. There is this growth that is forever more and more extractive. We know we don't want green growth because that's just another capitalist trick of doing extraction, corporate extraction, in violation with another brand. We need degrowth, we need less. And while that may be a first initial good tactic, I think it differs from the magic word of Indigenous cosmovision or knowledge, which is always about we need relation and we need balance, and that is a dynamic process, and that's something that always welcomes you back into the circle. So it's not just about straight lines up or straight lines down, which then still create a lot of binaries, but it's really about breaking those binaries of linear lines and coming back into the circle. Another way of the binaries misleading our thinking in linear lines are addressing production or consumption. So we have this extractivism. Oh, there's overproduction. Oh, we need to consume less. And in between that idea of being productive or being a consumer, what is obscured is the mechanisms of composting, the mechanisms of digesting, the mechanism of transformation. And I think actually here is a powerful field of disobedience in which we get to do the magic of transformation of energy. Okay. So I'm making big jumps here, but I want to kind of juxtapose some very primary and basics of the contradictions that exist between Indigenous cosmovision, Indigenous ontology, our understanding of ways of being, with the Western world of linear production and linear lines. So I will read a little bit here. Indigenous struggles against capitalist imperialism are best understood as struggles oriented around the question of land. Struggles not only for land, but also deeply informed by what the land as a mode of reciprocal relationship, which is itself informed by place-based practices and associated forms of knowledge, ought to teach us about living our lives in relation to one another and our surroundings in a respectful, non-dominating, and non-exploitative way. This is also called grounded normativity. So here it goes on to talk about Vine Deloria Jr., Lakota philosopher who wrote God is Red. And he notes that the most significant differences that exist between Indigenous and Western metaphysics revolves around the central importance of land to Indigenous modes of being, thought, and ethics. When ideology is divided according to American Indian and Western European traditions, writes Deloria, this fundamental difference is one of great philosophical importance. American Indians hold their lands, places as having the highest possible meaning, and all their statements are made with this reference point in mind. Most Western societies, by contrast, tend to derive meaning from the world in historical or developmental terms, thereby placing time, linear time, as the narrative of central importance. Deloria then goes on to conclude, when one group is concerned with the philosophical problem of space and the other with the philosophical problem of time, then the statements of either group do not make much sense when transformed from one context to the other without proper considerations of what is taking place. So, and closing this quote, it says that land occupies as an ontological framework for understanding relationships. It is a profound misunderstanding of land or place as simply some material object of profound importance to Indigenous cultures, although it is this too. Instead, it ought to be understood as a field of relationship of things to each other. It's a place as a way of knowing. And what is important there is that place doesn't grow. The earth doesn't get bigger, the land doesn't get bigger. So what is the purpose or the objective then is to grow our relationships. That's a qualitative growth rather than a quantitative growth. It is cyclical in nature because it has many moments of alignment and listening and relationship building. And it's not linear. So the accumulation myth, wrapping up this part, I am not an economist, and this circle always baffled me a little bit. But I just wanted to address it as it is. These are some formulas that kind of show how capital is operationalized, because sometimes there is confusion about money and capital not being money. We all might want to get paid for our labor at the end of the day. That doesn't mean we're a capitalist. The capital only gets made by those who get to make money of money and create speculation bubbles. So here you see that accumulation bubble, it kind of breaks the circle. It moves away from it. And the only way it can do that is through speculation and through exploitation. And by exploiting laborers, the land, it gets to have surplus value, and that surplus value can be speculated to make money off money. So that's quite an important thing to end with for this little part of situating ourselves in the ontology of the linear and how it breaks the circle. I'm going to stop sharing and I'll see you back in the next part.